comes is in the repair. So even if you do lose your cool, because we're all going to do it,
right?
Go to the kid, repair the situation, apologize, because how many of our generation's parents apologized to us when they messed up? Like, not many, really.
No.
If your parents did, you were in the minority, I feel like.
Yes.
And so if you can go to your child and repair, it actually can build a stronger connection. And then you're setting that example of, oh, this is what it looks like when somebody makes a mistake, owns up to it, comes in, tries to repair, tries to build that connection. And that's where I think we're trying to be, like, instead of being these hard disciplinarians, I think we are trying to.
Hey, how are you? It's so good to see you here again. Come on in. Hi, I'm your host, Reese, and this is Resilience by Faith podcast, where we highlight stories of resilience, transparency, and growth in hopes of giving you the push you need to make it through your weekly endeavors. Your struggles will build character and strength and take you to the next dimension. It's so easy to believe that you're alone, but not when we have community and not when we have the will of God over our lives. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Resilience by Faith podcast. My name is Reese, and today I have with me Miss Amy Spofford. She is joining us today to continue the series on motherhood. And y'all know, after I did the interview about postpartum depression, I got really inspired. I told you before, one of my close friends, she's in her third trimester, literally days away from giving birth to her first kiddo. And I don't know, that mixed with the last podcast just really inspired me in hearing her story. And I just went on a search for moms. And now Amy is here with us today to share with us her story. And what a special time it is, because it's actually Mother's Day weekend. And I'm very excited to have her, but very grateful that she took the time out of her Saturday to come and spend with us. So, hi, Amy. Thank you for being on the show.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Amy Spofford. I am a pre and postnatal coach. I'm also a holistic nutritionist and a mom of 3. I live in southeastern Pennsylvania with my husband and 3 kiddos.
Yes. Okay, so you are what we call a vet mama, because this is not your first merry-go-round, okay? And we have 3 kiddos, and gosh, what are their ages?
2, 4, and 7.
2, 4, and 7. Okay, yep, you are a vet mom for sure. So
I'm in it.
Huh?
I'm in it.
Yes, we're in it. We're in the thick of it, but we are very, very, very thankful for you and your experience. So kind of walk us through each of the births and how they differ from each other, but also I'll follow up with the second question, because sometimes I'm known to ask a lot of questions in one. So I'll let you start with the births.
Okay, so each of my 3 births, of course, were different. Every birth is going to be different, but I look back on each of them fondly, thankfully, for different reasons. So I had 2 epidural births, and I had 1 unmedicated birth. And my first was my largest baby, and that ended up being an epidural birth because my water broke middle of the day, went to the hospital, and of course, I had no experience. So I was like, I must be 10 centimeters. And they're like, you're 4.5. So I was like, okay, so I think I'm going to need an epidural, because it was a lot of pressure. I'm not trying to scare anyone. Everyone perceives pressure, intensity, pain differently. And there's a lot of moms out there who are able to kind of reframe it, channel it in a different way, whatever. I felt that at that time, epidural was the right choice for me. So it ended up being great, because thanks to the epidural, I was able to kind of hang out while I was laboring. I was hanging out with my siblings, my mom. This was pre-COVID, so everybody was allowed in there.
Yes.
And I was able to do that, hang out until it was like basically time to push. My labor with that one for a first wasn't bad. It was like 10 hours. But that was my largest baby and my first time. So the recovery from that one was actually the hardest. I had a 2nd degree tear with her. Actually, I had a 2nd degree tear with all, but probably because of the size and it being my first time, that was my hardest recovery. But my second birth was so different. I went into labor without water breaking, but I went into labor in the middle of the night, had to call my mom to come over to take care of my first baby. And I waited a little bit long to do that because it was the middle of the night and I wasn't trying to overreact. But
Right.
by the time she got there and we got to the hospital, my baby was born 15 minutes after we got to the hospital.
Ooh.
And it was intense. It was wild. But in hindsight, I'm so grateful for that experience because not many people get to experience that unmedicated birth, and it is wild. And so my third time, I also went into labor in the middle of the night. My water broke. And this time I knew, while I appreciated my wild experience, I wanted it to be a little bit of a calmer experience. And so I chose to have an epidural. This was actually the birth where I had Pitocin for the first time during labor because my other ones just were progressing on their own.
Yes.
But I had Pitocin, and then I used what was called a peanut ball, which kind of looks like an inflated yoga ball, but like in a peanut shape. And they put you on your side and they have it like between your legs, and it kind of helps the baby labor down. My epidural had worked wonderfully, so I couldn't really feel much. But at one point I was like, I'm feeling a lot of pressure. I think you need to check me. And they were like, oh, you're 10 centimeters. So that peanut ball, man, it works. And that was that baby was born with music playing, 4 pushes.
Yes.
And it was probably my most peaceful birth that I had, my third one. So I love birth stories. I love telling them. I love hearing them. So those are mine.
Me too. I think I'm falling in love. I hope that the Lord, well, maybe he's trying to tell me something, maybe he's not, but I'm just in this series where I'm just like, I want to know everything. And I'm very truly inspired because, like you said, birth stories are one of a kind. We all have one, but they all differ from each other. And of course, for those of you guys listening for the first time, I am a PA and I do psychiatry, but in school we had to learn about OBGYN, and I had an OBGYN rotation. And I always tell this story about how I've never seen a birth before. And I went on rotations, and my first birth I've ever seen was a vaginal birth. And it was a baby girl. I think we were 5 pounds, 6 ounces, and the dad wasn't there. And it was like an immigrant mom, and neither one of them spoke a lot of English, but neither one of them wanted to cut the cord. And the doctor knew I was in there, and she was like, do you want to cut it? And I was just like, me? And she was like, yeah, go ahead and cut the cord. When I tell you I cut the cord, and it's like all of my little feelings, emotions, my own Pitocin just came spilling out. And then I was like, oh, I cut the cord. And then I looked at the baby, and automatically my brain was like, my baby. Like I didn't want her to take the baby. I didn't want her to take the baby. I was like, no, it's so beautiful. And everybody in the room was crying, and it was such a moment. And then my second birth I saw was a C-section, and I really didn't understand the need for these boots. I was like, well, if the water already broke, then we don't need boots. I was like, no. But then I put them on, scrubbed in. And I just remember my doctor, she was moving the bladder out the way, and I had to retract. And she was like, okay. And she cut in too and got the baby out. And that was a toddler. I think that was a 10-pound baby. And she just placed them in my arms. And she was like, all right, hit the back, get the fluid out. And I was doing it gently. And she was like, you're not going to break them. Get the fluid out. And so she was like, go harder, tap them. And then finally the baby started crying, and the NICU nurses just swooped in there and took the baby, did the APGAR and everything. But that was an experience. And I was like, wow, okay, I think I like OBGYN. I think I want to do OBGYN. And then I went into psych. But it was a lot of fun. And when you said your first baby was your largest baby, how many pounds? How many ounces?
9 pounds, 5 ounces.
Yep, close. Yep.
You know, and 2 different doctors came in to see me after and was like, how did you not end up in a C-section when you're a first-time mom with a baby that big? And I honestly think that I went to chiropractic care during my pregnancy, and I feel like that really helped my pelvis be aligned. And when your pelvic bowl is aligned, there's less likely that the baby's going to get stuck. So I'll never really know why, but I feel like that could have helped.
Yes, because we also learn in school about passage power and passenger. So like the baby's the passenger, the power in the passage. And if that gets stuck and we have like uterine arrest when you're given birth, then we're going to go ahead and do a C-section just for the sake of you, for the sake of the baby, and all the things. That's so interesting though. And then you just you violated what I learned about in school. Also, when you have your first kid, it takes a little bit longer with the facing and waiting. But then the second one should, and each one after that should be quicker and quicker. Between the second and the third, which one was the fastest, or were they like about the same time?
Definitely the second was the fastest. Yeah, her total labor time was maybe 4 hours.
Uh-huh.
And then my son, my third, was like 9 hours.
9 hours.
But I think like with him, with the other two, my labor didn't really stall.
Uh-huh.
But when my husband took me to the hospital the third time, when I got there, I was able to like walk to my
Yes.
room. And they were like, "You're a little stalled. We might be giving you Pitocin."
Okay.
But since my water had broken, they were going to keep me.
Yes. And then, so I hear all sorts of stories about Pitocin. Some people say it was painful. Some people said all sorts of things, which I was like, what? Pitocin? I wouldn't have never thought. But then again, it makes sense because we're pushing you to have contractions and we're pushing the birth to start. But like, did you have any pain or anything during that time when you had the Pitocin?
So, yeah, I got the epidural in preparation for getting the Pitocin. I was kind of fortunate. They were like, "Hey, the anesthesiologist is ready now, and he has a couple C-sections scheduled. So you might want to take advantage of this now before we give you the Pitocin." So I kind of never experienced that Pitocin intensity, but Pitocin is synthetic oxytocin, and oxytocin is what helps our body trigger contractions. So I do think that when we're given Pitocin in an IV, it's probably just a higher intensity level than what our body would produce. So then it just makes the contractions more intense. And like we said, everybody perceives pain differently, but for a lot of people, they find that Pitocin contractions are more intense. But I don't know.
Yes, no. So like with your kiddos now, what would you say, what's something that you learned with your first kid that prepared you for the other two? Like, what did you learn about yourself? But then also having the first kid, we listen to a lot of people. We take in a lot of recommendations, and you need this gadget, you need that gadget, you have to do it like this, or you should be doing that. And like, how did you find your groove, like your flow, being a
I
mom?
think it's something that you can only get once you have some experience, right? I feel like maybe ultimately the answer is learning to surrender, that you won't be able to control everything. And that there are things you can control and prepare for birth and postpartum. I mean, I've built kind of a business around that, but at the same time, I think the mental work is such a huge part of it, because we can prepare all we want. We can control for what we can control, but so much of it is unpredictable. And I think the biggest skills you can learn are accepting that things are going to change, surrendering to this new way of life, being open-minded, being able to roll with the punches, that kind of thing. And so once like you hear all this advice, this is how it's going to go, this is what you can do, and then you have your baby and you're like, well, my experience is a little bit different. And I wonder if what really opens your eyes to that is when you do have a second and you're like, everything I thought I knew based on this one baby is not necessarily true for this other baby.
Yes.
If that all makes sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense, because you always hear like the jokes about it's not like they're born with instructions, you never know, but they all have unique personalities, and they all differ from each other. Like, how would you explain the personalities of your kiddos, one from the other one versus the third one?
So it's funny. I feel like I love learning about birth order and like hearing about like, oh, this is a firstborn, this is a middle child. And I feel like my kids kind of do fall into that. My firstborn is a little more of a rule follower, and my second is like my wild child. And of course, she's the one with the wild birth. It's like, how can that not be connected? But I don't know if it's that like the middle child, since I have three, are like maybe constantly fighting for attention. Like they weren't the first, but then they're also not the baby. But my wild child is by far my biggest challenge. I mean, she's also 4 right now, so that is a tough age in general. But I find that kind of stereotype of like the firstborn being a little bit of a rule follower, secondborn being a little bit more of a wild card, and then the third's just happy to be here.
Yes. And the third's just like, hi. Like I'm the baby. When did you really put like an emphasis on whether your kiddos were breastfed or whether they were formula fed?
So I do wish that I put less pressure on myself. with that whole topic because I know so much more now, but all of my kids were exclusively breastfed for 6 months. I never bought formula. I never had to use formula. And I'm grateful for that because I was committed to the breastfeeding journey. But I do wish, since I struggled so much with my first to breastfeed, I ended up exclusively pumping for 11 months. It's exclusive pumping is not for the weak. It took a lot out of me mentally and physically. And I don't look back and wish I would have stopped sooner, but I do wish I would have even considered formula because I think at the time I was just like, I need to provide her the best I possibly can. But it's like now in hindsight, I'm like, but the best you possibly can doesn't just mean like maybe nutritional value or whatever. It encompasses the mental impact on the mother and what works best for that family and their situations. And so I just want every mom out there to know, like, whatever works for you and the entire family unit is what's best for your baby. It's not just about one issue, you know?
Yes. And then I don't think so I follow this page on Instagram. Her page is Kiara the Leader. I think she comes up so much. It would be like a godsend if I can get her on the show too, because she shares so much on her Instagram about like how she had breast cancer, how she's pumping from one boob, and kind of like the stressors she goes through, especially she just had her third, and taking care of a newborn and like milk production and different things. But she shared one day these little nickel circle, like areola nipple covers that kind of heal, because she was like, I'm in so much pain. My nipples are chapped. Like, this is what I used. It healed, it helped. And that just brought a whole nother perspective, especially to me, being I don't have a kid yet, the things that you have to go through being a mom, but also things that a lot of people don't really put on Front Street and talk about a lot. I don't know. But
Absolutely.
did you have anything that you used that helped you during breastfeeding kind of ease pain, or any tips you would give? Because I know sometimes you can produce too much, produce too little, latching, that's like a whole thing, but
Yes, and those silver cups, I think they're called Silverettes, or maybe that's a brand, but either they weren't around or I didn't know about them when I was going through it, but apparently they're like these little silver cups. You put them like right in your bra against your skin, and they can apparently help heal like a sore and cracked nipple. But that's one thing I had. It's okay to like talk about nipples, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes.
So I had mine were like flat, or they might say like inverted when I first started. And that was one of the issues because if it's not protruded, your baby has a harder time latching on. And so there's this thing called a nipple shield that is a very, very thin plastic shield for your nipple, and it kind of has a protrusion on it with holes in the end, so it's like you put it on there and the baby can latch onto that better, and that helps a lot of people like help draw out the nipple so the baby can latch. That's one thing I used. Any of those nipple creams and balms are good. There's ones that are organic that you don't have to like wipe off before the baby feeds, but then there's also a prescription one that is incredibly effective, but you really do kind of have to wipe it off before the baby latches so that they're not ingesting this like prescription cream. That was helpful though. I had an oversupply with my first because since I think I was so worried about my supply and like I ended up exclusively pumping, I focused on emptying the breast completely every time I pumped. And that is the recommendation so that you can build your milk supply. But I think I did it so much that I ended up with an oversupply, which can lead to more engorgement, more clogged milk ducts. So like if you don't empty the breast in a timely fashion, there can be milk that gets clogged in the ducts, and then it feels kind of like a hard pebble or like a pea-sized lump under the skin, and it becomes painful. And if you don't resolve it, it can lead to an infection called mastitis. So I was using like warm compresses to relieve those. I was using hand pumps, hand expressing to try to get milk out to relieve those clogs. And these are all things that before you go through it, people just don't tell you. And It's why on my page, which is called Eat What Feels Good on Instagram and TikTok, I do series called Things They Don't Tell You. And one series is Things They Don't Tell You About Breastfeeding. And it's like all these things that it's like, oh, if I only knew this ahead of time, I wouldn't have had to kind of freak out and Google things in the moment. I would be like, I'm going to go back and watch that video. Or, things just, when you don't get smacked in the face with something and you've heard of it before, it's easier to manage it. So I think, like you said, talking about these things is really helpful for those that come after us.
Right. And then there's another one. We could go on for days, but there's another
We
one.
really could.
The placenta. A lot of people talk about what you can do with that afterwards. Some people keep their placenta. Some people put them in capsules, which I didn't even know that was a thing. Some people make smoothies out of it. Some people cook it and eat it. Some people do all these things with their placentas. And I'm just like, is there any benefit to that?
I'm not sure what the research is. I didn't do this with any of my kids, but apparently there are species of animals that do consume their placenta because, in theory, I think the theory is that the placenta holds a lot of the nutrients. Like, it just supported our baby this whole time. So it contains a lot of the nutrients and the vitamins that could be good for our own recovery. And so I think the theory is like people will take their placenta, they send it to like a company or whatever that specializes in this, and they like freeze dry it, put it in capsules, and then you can consume it unless you actually want to like cook it. But a lot of people, I think, do the placenta encapsulation. I never did it. I think probably make sure if you do it that it's a very sanitary process, that you're protected in that way. But I'm not going to knock anybody who does it.
The girl, the same girl I was telling you about, she did it with, I think, all three of her kids, but they are exercise, sports, science, personal trainers, and they have a whole business surrounding it. But she always did it, and I always question, is anybody else out there in the world? So if you guys are listening and you have experience doing that, send me a message, leave a comment, and let me know kind of what your experience was and how you went about doing it, because that's something that I always like not questioned, but was interested in learning more about that and kind of what the process would be. But I guess switching back gears, when it comes to your kiddos and kind of getting them first, I guess maneuvering the newborn phase, then the toddler phase, and everything else after that, when they started school, or when it comes to teaching them boundaries and different things like that, how did you kind of go about that? With kids, how did you figure out what was the most important thing you wanted them to learn at what age, and how did you kind of start?
I think, well, I try to do a lot of like reading of like articles and books on parenting and stuff. And I know a lot of other women do that. I think a lot of us kind of start out doing things the way that our parents did them because that's what we know. Yep. And then I think especially the generation of moms coming up now is realizing, maybe the way that things were done with us isn't always like the best way. And I think a lot of us are trying to break generational cycles, whether they're mild or, more intense, like trauma things that you need to resolve. So I think our natural instinct is to do things the way that our parents did, which is like, send to timeout and, make sure that your kids are disciplined and make sure that they're respecting you and all of this. But with this kind of gentle parenting concept that has come around, it's more about teaching them, like modeling management of conflict better. And like, wait, if we yell at them in conflict, then maybe they'll yell at others when they have conflict. And like, is that really how we want to be managing it? So it is hard to not do things the way things were done for you. But my husband and I think it's so important to be on the same page with your partner. We're like, okay, I think we do actually want to do things a little bit differently. We've chosen to not do like the spanking thing for discipline. We did start out doing the timeouts, and we're like, okay, listen, like maybe instead of timeout, we might have to remove a child from a situation, but maybe we go with them and we have a talk. And ultimately, I follow Dr. Becky, who's like a parenting expert on social media. What she says is like, you're gonna mess up. Right. Don't beat yourself up for messing up. Where the connection comes is in the repair. So even if you do lose your cool, because we're all gonna do it. Right. Go to the kid, repair the situation, apologize. Because how many of our generation's parents apologized to us when they messed up? Like not many, really. No. If your parents did, you were in the minority, I feel like. Yes. And so if you can go to your child and repair, it actually can build a stronger connection. And then you're setting that example of, oh, this is what it looks like when somebody makes a mistake, owns up to it, comes in, tries to repair, tries to build that connection. And that's where I think we're trying to be like, instead of being these hard disciplinarians, I think we are trying to be firm with boundaries, but explain why, have the conversations and build the connection.
Yes.
And sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying it, but I think we're all doing our best, but there's some work to be done there.
It truly is. And I kind of like, I know a lot of people, especially old school, my mom, other people's parents are kind of like, what is this? But because that's not what they're used to. That wasn't how they were raised. That's not how they raised their kid, and vice versa. But I just think it's just something about this new generation of kiddos coming up in the world. The boundaries are going to be strong. The mental health is going to be so much better. I'm just so excited for them, for them to experience lives in ways at least I wasn't able to experience because of how I was raised. Now I had a good childhood, but also like the parent didn't spare the rod. Definitely not. And I think I turned out okay, but it's just something to say about what the tools that you're putting in their backpack to kind of get through life. It's completely different, and they have a whole new opportunity. And just excited about how, like, the kids coming up, yes, but then the kids that are going to have the kids, and how that's going to just keep going down the line. That's exciting to me. I don't know.
It is to me too, because it's like, wow, this generation of, I guess they're calling it Gen Alpha
Yes.
after Gen Z, they're going to be more emotionally intelligent. They're going to be able to express their needs and boundaries more readily.
Yes.
And I love that. I'm already seeing it with Gen Z. So I'm an elder millennial, as you would call it. But
Uh-huh.
I
Me
know some people in like the Gen Z, which I think is born anywhere like 1997 and beyond, but
too.
who are better at establishing their boundaries and
Mhm.
communicating their mental health needs. And I'm like, wow, I think we actually have a lot to learn from Gen Z. But
Yes.
we're teaching our kids to, I don't know, have more autonomy and control over their emotions. And I think one thing I learned in parenting actually has nothing to do with the kids. It's more like parenting is a chance to reparent yourself.
Right.
And if you're doing the work on working on your own self and regulating your own emotions,
Right.
then you are actually serving your kids the best you possibly can, but you're also serving yourself.
Yes. And I love that, because inner child work and healing and everything, that is such a hot topic. Definitely for the last couple of months, at least, that I've seen in 2024, a lot of people are coming out more like, I'm a inner child coach and I help people do this, and the videos on TikTok, and that's what's trending right now. But I'm learning a lot from these psychologists and different people who get on, and they have books and resources and podcasts to share for inner child work, because you just never know. And I think that's a beautiful outcome and a beautiful way to look at it, a beautiful thing to work on. But I do want to ask you, I forgot completely to ask you about your mental health in all three pregnancies, and kind of, did you experience postpartum, or did you go through anything that you needed the extra support after giving birth? And how was your support system during those times?
Support is so huge, isn't it?
Yes.
I had a wonderful support system. So I have a lot of local family. My mom, my siblings are close. I have cousins that are close. My husband had parental leave, 6 weeks of paid parental leave, while I had 0 weeks of paid parental leave. I was able to take 12 weeks unpaid, but he
Uh-huh.
took 4 weeks at the beginning of every child's life. So, and then he took the extra 2 weeks around the holidays to cover that, since I work in healthcare and
Uh-huh.
cannot like take a whole week at Christmas. So having my husband home with me for the first 4 weeks of each of our babies' lives, I think saved my mental health.
Yeah.
Like just having someone else there, even
Uh,
if like the baby's sleeping on my chest and we're on the couch, he's there to kind of supervise that to make sure that's safe.
yes.
He was able to take the baby, hold the baby, do all of the other household things so I could just focus on myself and the baby. And
Right.
so many people don't have that. And that is absolutely huge. And I think like even before the baby's born, it's such a good idea to kind of gather that support system and say, hey, would you be able to come over? Or like setting up a meal train for after the baby's born, and even just getting food cooked for you is huge. After I think I developed like anxiety in my second pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And like I noticed it during my pregnancy. I would like hear a noise in the middle of the night and like get up and be looking out the window. My husband's like, what are you
Uh-huh.
doing? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm anxious. And then after my third was born, my second and third, I had these intrusive thoughts after they were born. Like I'd wake up in a panic, like the baby's wrapped up in the sheets, but really they were in their bassinet next to me.
Gotcha.
Or I'd be walking down the hallway, and we have like a balcony at our upstairs, and I'd be walking down the hallway like, oh my gosh, the baby's going to leap out of my arms and over the balcony. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. Like, that's not, and that's what intrusive thoughts are. They're like these scary hypothetical scenarios that get brewed up in your head. And for some people, they get bad enough that it prevents them from doing things, like prevents them from wanting to leave the house because they're so afraid that something bad's going to happen to their baby. I think like when it crosses, I'm not a psychologist, but you may be able to speak to this. When it crosses that threshold into changing your behavior and actually preventing you from doing regular things is when you might want to seek professional support, because that's when it could be actually diagnosed postpartum anxiety. I think I probably did have postpartum anxiety. It was never diagnosed. About a year after my third was born, I finally went and got diagnosed, or got evaluated, I should say. And I was actually also concerned about adult ADHD because I had so many symptoms. Like adult ADHD manifests in women very differently than just like typical ADHD that you think of in kids. And I had so many of the symptoms. So I went and got myself this full panel, full psych evaluation. And I actually ended up not getting diagnosed with postpartum anxiety or ADHD, but they were like, you do have the symptoms. Like you are borderline, but you just don't cross that threshold. And they just said like, you know, if you want medication for it, like we can prescribe it, but we think that with the strategies for mental health and self-care that you have already in place, that you can get through this unmedicated. And so that's what I've been doing. And so there's so much you can do for your mental health, even if you don't get officially evaluated or get medicated.
Right. Definitely. And I'm glad you said that, because when I went and I got, went through my little, well, not my little, but like my third degree, and I had to write a dissertation. It was on adult ADHD and how it differs from gender to gender, and how females are more likely to internalize things, whereas boys don't. And so it's more easier to catch and diagnose, whereas a lot of boys pretty much come across as hyperactive, where a lot of females come across as inattentive, and it's just harder. And we don't think we have a problem. It's just, I'm not trying hard enough. I didn't study that, or I didn't read that through thoroughly enough. Maybe I just need to try harder, when indeed we are struggling with something and we'll never know. But I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until after I graduated and went through my boards and all the hard work. Then I got diagnosed.
That is incredible that you did all of that without really fully knowing. But we compensate so well, don't we?
We do. And I never knew. And I was just like, gosh, that extra time on test I could have had, or those accommodations I could have asked for that I didn't have. I wish I would have got diagnosed sooner, but I didn't know I had a problem. So I just thought, again, I wasn't trying hard enough. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's a thing. It definitely is a thing among females. It's a thing. But
even though I didn't get the diagnosis, I was still grateful that I went through the process, because it just taught me a lot about myself. And I was like, oh, okay, I actually don't meet the threshold for this. And I actually probably could use a lot of the strategies that I already kind of had in place to manage it. Well, I can speak to like maybe how we treat them, or how we've like managed them differently, maybe, if that helps. We realized that with my, as I call wild child, my middle one, her behavior is better when we give her more one-on-one time. So it's like almost like you realize how different your kids are, and then you have to maybe kind of change the way you parent. Like each of our kids has the same two parents, but they kind of say, I've heard the phrase, every kid has different parents, because, you know, the parents that my firstborn had were brand new at this, didn't know anything, were doing it for the first time. The second time my secondborn had more seasoned parents, had a kind of ways of doing things, but then had to still adjust to accommodate for her needs. And then same thing for my third. So we notice like what the different needs are of each of them, and we can kind of cater to that. And we try to be extra conscious of our middle child and not neglecting her, or making sure we give her that extra one-on-one time, so that she can feel like that secure attachment and not feel like she's always like kind of left in the dust. And now that my oldest is 7, I feel like we're able to kind of have like real people conversations with her. She's asking like questions she's asked about, like how babies are born, how babies are made. And we're trying to starting to try to give her age appropriate explanations for things, and really just foster that curiosity, because the fact that she's asking me the questions means that maybe she's ready to hear some of the answers.
Yeah, and I know that can be very scary for parents, because they're just like, okay, do we go all in? Do we sugarcoat? Do we give real world answers that are sugar coated? And when they're old enough, do we kind of go more in depth? Or do we just tell them
Hmm.
that babies come from the store? I don't, it's just like, how do we not?
I think I think parents know their kids, and I think parents kind of know what their kids can handle.
Yes,
Every 7-year-old is not mature enough to hear the real answers,
right.
but or they're ready to hear, like, I think we started out saying that an egg and a sperm come together, and an egg comes from the mom and a sperm comes from the dad, and like, okay, maybe the first time she asked, there was no follow-up questions.
Right.
Like, how did it get in, or like, how did they get together, like that kind of thing. But my cousin had a baby via IVF, and I was able to explain fully how that baby was made.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and that
that's
was
a little
good.
bit more. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they understand like how babies come out. They're like,
Right.
they come out either this way or this way, and mommy had
Yeah.
this way, and they ask. It's amazing, like the thoughtful questions they ask. They're like, so did it hurt? I'm like, oh, well, they gave me medicine so that it didn't hurt, and that
Yes.
was all. That was all it needed to be. I didn't need to really go further.
Right.
You
So,
know,
how was your first kiddo when you got pregnant with the second one? Were they very supportive, or were they like, what's going on? Why is your stomach growing all of a sudden bigger than the rest of your body?
she was only 2. Well, I guess when I got pregnant, she was like not even 2.
Yes.
So I think she was kind of like, I don't know what's going on, but maybe it's because she was the first child or whatever, but she never really gave us any like behavior issues about it. She wasn't like, whoa, what's this? What's happening?
Right.
When I would be like breastfeeding and stuff, she'd be like, mommy, play with me. And then I've heard the advice to not like blame the baby, like, oh no, I'm feeding Marin right now. Like, I can't. It's like, yes, I'd love to play with you. Can you give me 5 minutes and I'll be there for you, so that you don't kind of foster that resentment between the kids. Um, but yeah.
Wow. And then when you were pregnant with the baby, how did, like,
Oh
I
yes.
know
Well,
different ages,
when
but
when I was pregnant with the baby, my oldest was like 4.5, and so she was like that age. She was like very into it. She was so excited. She would hug my belly. She'd like pull up my shirt and like hug my belly and like poke it. And she's like, "I'm giving it a hug," and she just was so stoked. And my middle child at that time was only 2, so she didn't really get it. But yes, I think the older they are when you have another baby, the more like involved, excited, and helpful they can be.
yes, and I didn't really go too much into your husband, but kind of like between the first pregnancy and the last one, how did you see the growth in him? Because I know we're all growing together when we're adding to the family, but kind of like how did he change over time during the pregnancies?
It's funny, like before I had my first baby, he would like hold a baby like, oh gosh, what is this? Like it's a hot potato or something. But he just like took to it. I feel like I'm the one reading all like the parenting manuals, and like things just seem to come natural to him. I don't
Yeah,
know. But he loved me being pregnant. Like I was like forcing him to like feel the baby kicks, and after a while I think he was like, okay, I got it. Because
yeah.
I was obsessed with the baby kicks. But he was absolutely great. I mean, he just took to it.
Yes. It's crazy how females and males are just different, the way that we differ in personality and how we're just like, you do that, and men are just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. They're like, we'll just go with the flow. But it is funny how now, like, obviously he holds a baby much more comfortably than he did before.
Yes, yes, we're not gonna break them. But
Yeah.
definitely, yes, it's wonderful. How would you say you've grown from the first pregnancy to the third one?
I don't even recognize that lady. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, like after I had my first, I was very much like, I'm not going to change. I'm the
yeah.
same person. We're just going to strap her to our belt, strap her to our chest, and
Uh-huh.
do all the same things because we're very social. We have a lot of friends. We do a lot of things, and honestly, with one baby, it's actually pretty easy to take them wherever you want to go. Go to a
Right.
crowded restaurant, the like din of the sound in the restaurant, like the baby just sleeps. It's fantastic.
Yes.
But the more kids you have, the harder that is.
Hmm.
But I think I did mentally try to resist the identity shift that
Right.
happens, and it is inevitable. And I do think that that kind of ends up hitting you at some point. And I
Yes.
do encourage pregnant women to just try to like think through that a little bit ahead of time, because there is this almost a sense of grief that comes with releasing your former life. And it doesn't mean you have to abandon your personality. You can absolutely feel like you're mostly the same person, but something fundamentally about your life has changed. And
Right.
there's sometimes an identity kind of crisis along with that, because especially if you're working or career person, you're like, okay, I'm this successful, organized, self-sufficient, independent career person. These are my roles. Like we all have our labels and we identify so strongly with them. And then all of a sudden this like huge label gets added to your resume. And
Yeah.
you're like, am I the same person as I was? Am I going to lose myself because I'm now a mom? Does my entire identity have to be a mom? And
Mhm.
the answer is no, but it's sometimes hard to find that balance. Inevitably, you probably will miss some aspects of your former life, but there's so much good and excitement to come with the changing and added roles.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think in other like interviews that I've had, we talked about that, like with new moms, with veteran moms, with grandmas, like how identity change from, hey, I'm a mom to a grandmother versus like, okay, I'm myself and I've always been myself and I know myself and I've just grown with myself and now I'm somebody's mom. Like, is this real? I never thought I could be somebody's mom, and let alone mom to one, but then mom to three. It's like, well, who am I now? They kind of described it as just adding another layer of self, going through the chapters of a book, kind of just letting it unfold and letting the change happen without trying to resist it, because you know it's coming, and we have the months to kind of get prepared for it, but nothing can honestly prepare you for all of it.
I think that's a beautiful way of thinking of it. I think
Yes,
that that whole like story analogy, that like this
right.
is just part of our story and we're growing. And I do think it's really important to maintain a sense of your true personality, even if you're have adapted and changed over time, because ultimately the years go by fast and you will end up being an empty nester at some point. And you don't want to become an empty nester and then think, well, who am I now? Because
Yeah.
I abandoned everything else about myself except for being a mom. And
Yep.
so keeping those hobbies, keeping your friendships, cultivating them, maintaining and cultivating your relationship, if that works for you, is so important, because you are a person outside of being a mom. And that's a great example to set for your kids too.
Yes. Yes. And I'm so happy you said that, because I do deal with a lot of parents that are empty nesters now, and they're just like following where we go back into a helicopter mom, but we can't be a helicopter mom because now they're adults too now. So then it's like, okay, so what do I do? What do me and my husband do? And I try to encourage people, yeah, let's go crochet, bingo, learn a new skill, travel. There's so much to life in every chapter. I feel like it's always new things to discover about yourself, and you never honestly stop growing, even all up until the last days. You're always going to grow and grow and grow.
And it's never too late to find yourself again. You know, if you
Yeah.
find empty nesters that are like, man, I wish I would have done a little bit differently. I wish I would have gone on more of those girls' trips instead of declining because of my kids, or I wish I would have kept up with tennis or whatever. There's never too late.
Right.
It's never too late.
It's never too late. Now, I did know earlier you mentioned like you have a whole business around postnatal care, and I think you said prenatal as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm I'm hoping to get either like a one-on-one or group coaching program off the ground, because this concept of like new moms these days not really having a village is like really weighing heavily on me, because I feel like support is so important. And so a group coaching program for pregnant moms to kind of transition them into postpartum and
Yeah.
carry them through that and holding their hand while giving them kind of our own little village together and connecting them with each other, with other people in the same exact phase of life, I
Uh-huh.
think would be amazing. I do have a postpartum online course that I've developed that's very comprehensive that would take you through the same thing. But part of me wonders if people would rather kind of have more of a direct connection, and like it would
Right.
be virtual, but like Zoom calls, Zoom meetings, and like actual real time communication with people versus a
Uh-huh.
almost like self-paced DIY course. So my course is still in place. I'm actually turning my course into a written manual now. So I have my
Yeah.
hands in a lot of things. But that is my goal, my dream, with my ultimate mission being to improve the mental health outcomes of new moms. Because ultimately, I feel like the more supported and prepared that we are
Uh-huh.
going into it, and the
Right.
more supported we are after the fact, has got to impact our mental health outcomes.
Yes, it does. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy as a fellow mental health advocate. Like, there are more people finally getting it in every area of life. And I'm just, again, my excitement for the future and what's to come, even after I'm long gone, what the world is going to morph into about mental health and the things and how people, the stigma hopefully will go away one day, and how people are just going to embrace that part of their health, because a lot of people neglect it and they suffer and they don't have to, and they don't know about things, and why would I go see a psychiatrist? I'm not crazy. I get that a lot. And then they finally come in and they're like, it wasn't as bad as what I thought. I definitely remember one day I had a patient come in and say, oh, I thought y'all do lobotomies here, or something where they shock your brain. And I was like, well, if we were in the 1930s, 1940s or something like that, maybe, but not today. And they just laughed, and we laughed together, and it wasn't a big deal, but they hyped themselves up and they're like, I wonder what's going to happen. Nothing. We're just going to have a conversation. That's it.
And it's like so many new moms go through this, learn everything the hard way. And then everybody just does the same thing after them. It's like, wait, we can stop this. Like, we can leave the door open behind us and reach down and help the people that come after us. And let's do that. And I think the reason why we haven't is because of stigma, because of like maybe the TMI factor of some of these topics. And I just think that, like, you know, social media obviously has its faults, but one good thing is, like, people are kind of becoming less afraid to just share their stories. And people learn through stories. Stories are so powerful.
They are. And that was one of the reasons why I started the podcast, is because I was like, everybody has resilience. We're all a human race all together, just trying to figure it out. Why not share our stories together so that we can be inspired by one another and know that we're not alone? So I thank you for telling us about what you do, but why you do it. And if my audience wants to find you on social media or support you in any way, give you some feedback about today, how can they connect with you?
So I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Eat What Feels Good. And I think I created that account back when I got my holistic nutrition certification. Part of my postpartum program does also involve like healing through nutrition and eating in ways that can support our nutrition without any of the dogma, no restriction, nothing like that, because healing, nourishment is so important for healing. But yes, so Eat What Feels Good at Instagram and TikTok. I have a website, amyspofford.com. And please reach out and ask me anything, or follow me, or share my account with any pregnant person that you love, because I really feel like knowledge is power. My intent is never to scare people. It's always to inform, prepare, and then provide tangible solutions, you know? And so I just love it. I have loved this conversation.
Me too.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, and thank you for coming on and sharing all that you have. And I just have a feeling that pretty soon I'll be on your podcast. I don't want to put that on you, but I have a feeling like the topics that you cover are so important. And I feel like there's so many people, we're just all out here trying to figure it out, but we don't have to do it alone. And I think the topics that you cover is definitely something that other people need to hear. If anything, I need to hear, because one day, if God bless me, I will have a kid, and I don't want to feel like I'm alone, or I can't relate to other people because they're over here and I'm over here. Like, support is so important. And I think creating that group and having people feel connected, no matter what their story is, just knowing that they have somebody there with them is wonderful. I hope that everything comes
solidarity is half the battle. I swear. Like, just people feeling like their feelings are valid. Like so much of it.
Yes. So if anything, I want to encourage you to go ahead and do it. Just go ahead and do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's not a perfect time. Just go ahead and put it out there and let it beautifully come together, because there's a reason why it's on your heart. And I'm telling you, it's very much so needed. Very much so needed.
Thank you so much. Maybe this is my sign.
Yep, confirmation. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this show. We are going to continue our series, and definitely leave your comments, leave your feedback, get in touch with Amy, let her know what you think and what you got from the show and what you've learned, and anything you're more interested in learning more about. Definitely reach out to her, and I will see you guys on the next episode. Bye, guys. Thank you, Amy, so much for
Bye.
coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in to Resilience by Faith podcast. If you love this podcast, if it's helped you in any way, motivate or inspire you, please make sure that you leave us a rating or a review. Make sure that you're following us on Facebook at Resilience X Faith with Reese, and make sure you're following us on Instagram at Resilience X Faith POD to make sure you engage and get plugged into the community. Until next time.